was away for a couple of days. I know a lot of people were wondering what happened to the recordings and everything. We didn't have any because they were all reruns. But tonight we're live. 888-673-3700. That's 888-673-3700. I was talking earlier about how, when you're in the hospital, TV is not all that great. I mean, it's something you do to pass the time. Just lay back, listening to the heart monitor, and you're watching television. But see, I go to the hospital I go to is a religious hospital. And so, many of the channels at the hospital are all devoted to religion. And so when you go through and you're flipping through the channels, you either get to watch, religious programming or the Animal Planet or Nat Geo. You can't see anything fun. Then you find the networks and you watch those. So I did that. And what's horrible is that I got stuck watching like TMZ, Inside Edition, and Entertainment Tonight. And the thing is I always, look at those shows with disdain because they're nothing more than, giving people with no talent an opportunity to be on TV. So we're talking about the Kardashians. We're talking about, all these other people that you're like going, why do we care? But there was a story that I really had interest in, and that's the Bill Paxton story. I don't know if you know this. Bill Paxton passed away. He was an actor that was in Aliens, and he was in Twister. He was also played Chet in Weird Science. So I talked about his death. He died at 61. Really a tragic story. He died of a stroke. He had heart problems. He died of a stroke during operation, killed him. So I know that, that was an interesting story. But then they went back into the story about the Academy Awards. And I know it's been like 2 or 3 days since the Academy Awards. I was like, Clyde, why are you going to talk about this for? Nah, just give me a moment. They made this big deal out of the flub that happened with Faye Dunaway and Warren Beatty when they were discussing, the Best Picture. And Faye Dunaway said it was La La Land. Turned out it wasn't La La Land. It turned out to be the movie Moonlight. Which, after that happened, I got so cynical and I thought, okay, whatever. But, not that I saw either. I didn't care. But, the biggest flub I thought was not the idea that they did this. I thought the biggest flub of all was, Hollywood acts as though they're so above you. And, they have this every year. They have the Employee of the Year Club all getting together and they vote Employee of the Year. And that's what you're getting. You're watching a ceremony. It's being carried out by people who are voting for their Employee of the Year that goes to all the parties and does all the campaigning and pays all the money. And that's what it does. That's what the Academy Awards are. It has nothing to do with talent. It has nothing to do with box office. It has everything to do with which actor in which movie campaigns the most, pays out the most money, goes to the right dinners. I mean, there's somewhere out there where you can, Denzel Washington actually does a speech, or he actually says what he did to get his award. So I went to all the right dinners. I did all this. They told me if I went to the right dinners, I paid the right money, and I did this, I'd wind up getting the award. I got it because I did it. And he told everybody, to the world, he said, this is how I got my award. And, I'll find it. I'll have to find it and play it for you. It's amazing that he just came around and said, how you get the award if you're an Academy Award winner. And, which adds more fuel to the fire here about what I'm talking about, because the biggest flub they did, I believe, the Academy Awards, is they handed the Oscar to a short subject documentary about the white helmets. And while some people will agree that, will say, oh, they're heroes. What are you doing dissing on the white helmets? I'm a little suspicious of a film, a short subject film that's funded by George Soros, for one thing. And another thing is that the white helmets themselves are funded by a guy who basically hires assassination, people who can assassinate people, mercenaries, and he organizes them. And so he's great. He's a great humanitarian up to the point where he's hiring assassination squads for militaries across the world, all over the world. He's with British intelligence, and that's where they got these guys. And not only that, you got a group of guys who, for some reason, you got the real Syrian civil defense, who, when things go down, they say, well, we go to these calls, and you can call 113 on the phone, and we get called out on 113. Like, we have 911. They have 113. You call 113 on the phone, and the civil defense people will be there to help rescue your child. Only if the first responders aren't the white helmets. Otherwise, they'll be there with their camera crews, taking children out of burning rubble with their bare hands and putting it on camera so everybody can see it. Which is basically the Hollywood version of some Syrian relief group, some humanitarian group that, according to the civil defense, they're a farce. It's all staged. It's all a staged farce. And to think that they handed the Academy Award to a group It's organized by NATO, organized by the European Union and the CIA. It's just par for the course because my guest tonight, Jay Dyer, who's been on the program before, he wrote a book called Esoteric Hollywood: Sex, Cults, Symbols, and Film. And he has a chapter. I want to talk about some other things too, but he has a chapter called The CIA and Hollywood Dark Marriage. And I have, for the longest time, felt that the CIA still has its talons in Hollywood. That Hollywood has an arm that is propaganda, especially in wartime, where films are made that look like entertainment, that want to, jerk at your heart, but in reality, they're propaganda to further the cause for a war that we don't want to be in or that we don't need to be in. And Syria has been one of those, pet projects of Hollywood for a long time, as with movies like Argo. And I remember Pearl Harbor back in 2001 that came out just before 9/11. The 9/11 attacks. We have a attack on America situation that happened. And just before that, a few months before that, we have a film in theaters that was still playing, by the way, when the attacks on New York happened. Pearl Harbor. So, and that was another Ben Affleck film. There was Argo and this film, Ben Affleck film. The other, this White Helmet film, though, is an independent film. But Jay Dyer's with us tonight on Ground Zero. The book, Esoteric Hollywood: Sex, Cults, and Symbols in Film. Jay's analysis has grown to become one of the premier film and philosophy sites on the internet. I go there often. It showcases the talents of Jay Dyer, my guest tonight, who is a remarkable guest, always been on the show, and just remarkable to have him on. Jay Dyer, welcome to Ground Zero.
Thanks, Clyde. Always a pleasure to be on with you. I was really wanting to do my Bill Paxton.
You do a Bill Paxton?
I do, yeah.
Let's hear it.
Is this another bug hunt? Game over, man. Game over, man.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good. I can't do Bill Paxton, but that's damn good. Yeah, it's sad to see him go. He was one of the greats, I thought.
Yeah, I grew up with watching Weird Science, so.
Yeah, Chet. You'll never forget Chet.
I'll never forget that Chet laugh.
No. So anyway, yeah, one of the greats. And that was interesting because, like I was saying, he'd been dead for like maybe a couple days. And, they're still talking about Bill Paxton. How Hollywood was shocked by his death. But then they went back to this whole situation with Warren Beatty and Faye Dunaway in the film Moonlight as opposed to La La Land. And when they said that Moonlight won, I saw what they did, I guess. And I thought to myself, Hollywood's always been criticized for being too white and anti-gay. So what do? They give the Oscar to a film about a gay black man. And I thought that was I was being very cynical about that. But, hey, it said on the paper that it was that film. But Faye Dunaway screwed up and they gave him the wrong envelope. But I think the real clunker was when they handed the Oscar to Al-Qaeda, literally. They basically, our superstars in this were the white helmets. What do you think about that and that idea that this independent film that was financed independent by Soros got the Academy Award and these guys are basically propaganda tools?
I thought it was a brilliant way that you characterized it as the real flub. Yeah. I didn't think about it that way because everybody was talking about this nonsense of, reading the right card and giving it to the wrong movie and this kind of stuff. And you're absolutely right that the real issue here is the big giant machine that is Hollywood that is not just married to the CIA. I was thinking as you were talking about the introduction there, we think of if you grew up in some kind of a evangelical household or something like that, then you think of sex outside of marriage as wrong.
Right.
And I was thinking about the last chapter in my book being, the book is titled Sex, Cults, and Symbols in Film. And then I was thinking how fitting that is with the last chapter being a dark marriage between the CIA and Hollywood. So they actually do have, sex only inside that marriage.
Right.
I'm speaking darkly here, but yeah, exactly. The relationship between these agencies, between the Pentagon, between especially, these offices and branches of the military and Hollywood has been there from the get-go.
Right.
And I don't want to get too off course, but you go all the way back to the beginning with films like Birth of a Nation. Mm-hmm. That was actually a propaganda film. So, the military's always seen the capabilities for film. And then we all know from World War II, all those propaganda reels. Mm-hmm. And that was done on both sides, Allied and Axis. The Soviets, too, by the way. There were a number of Soviet documentaries that were actually propaganda for Sovietism. Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to remember that there's a certain Soviet guy who made a lot of those films, the Bolshevik guy, mm-hmm. like Battleship Potemkin is one of those. Sergei Einstein, that's his name. And then, when you move over to the fascists, you've got Leni Riefenstahl. Right. And, you get Triumph of the Will and Olympia and these kinds of things. And actually, we look back on that and we think of that as, how did they fall for that World War II propaganda? How did they fall for that Soviet propaganda? They were so stupid. They all fell for it. And here we are.
Have you seen Triumph of the Wills? I remember I had to watch that. And I watched it, and I was like blown away at how Leni Riefenstahl, and also Olympia, mm-hmm. where, a lot of people don't know this, but a lot of the pomp and circumstance and the torch lighting and all that was given to us by Leni Riefenstahl and the Nazis.
Exactly. And it's not just Axis, it's also Allies. When you think of it, a lot of people don't think about Frank Capra. Casablanca is actually a war propaganda film. Yeah. So it goes on both sides, and what I'm getting at is it's absolutely no different. And in fact, it's more sophisticated and scientific nowadays. Right. With all the glitz and the glam and the CGI and all this gobbledygook that they put up there.
Well, it's not just using fiction. It's basically wrapping everything in a bit of they're taking the nonfiction and put a lot of fictionalized stuff in it, and people walk away and they go, "Oh, I saw that. That's what happened. It didn't happen any other way." We've got to take a break, Jay, and we'll get back into what we were talking about earlier about the propaganda here. It's really amazing. Jay Dyer with us tonight. Esoteric Hollywood: Sex, Cults, and Symbols in Film. Get this book. It's amazing. I was reading through it. I've been reading through it a lot. It's a good reference book. 888-673-3700. We'll be back.
FM News 101.
This is Ground Zero on FM News 101.
Esoteric Hollywood: Sex, Cults, and Symbols in Film. Jay Dyer with us tonight on Ground Zero. His great book is available. You picked that up. But we're talking about how film and propaganda all work together. Hollywood, apparently, they have given an award, and I think it was the biggest flub up. They gave an award to a motion picture that was a short subject documentary about the White Helmets. And the more I read about the White Helmets, I realize that they're nothing more than a propaganda tool. And that's why, I was reading a story from, actually, I read from a story that was written by the Civil Defense Group in Syria, saying, who are these guys? We just know they show up and they have a camera crew with them. But we were talking earlier about, going on back to Leni Riefenstahl, and we were talking about the Nazi propaganda with Triumph of the Will. I was reading something. I was sharing this with you. I want to share it with my audience. We know that George Lucas, when he did Star Wars, actually was inspired by old World War II movies, especially the TIE fighters and the X-Wings fighting. That's taken directly from old World War II plane footage. But, of course, a lot of the segments on the Death Star were taken from Leni Riefenstahl's Triumph of the Will, which basically is all the Nazi stuff. Well, apparently, I was reading this story. Graduates from Princeton's 2012 class will not be able to attend a Star Wars-themed party in Stormtrooper gear due to fears that it will convey a racist message. A rules committee organizing a 5-year class reunion party in early June around the fictional Star Wars universe was contacted about characters allegedly inspired by World War II era events. Subsequently, Stormtroopers will not be allowed at the party. A few classmates reached out expressing concerns over our choice to use stormtroopers as our costume inspiration. The email said, "We have been informed of the origin of this word and its connections to early mid-20th century Germany. This is something neither we nor anyone at our reunion committee were aware of, but something we take very seriously. Tonight we made a unanimous decision to remove stormtrooper costumes from the party." Isn't that crazy, Jay?
Does that mean that if I impersonate Lando Calrissian, I'm racist? I don't understand.
Well, I'll tell you what. They're wrong about the stormtroopers being based on Nazi Germany. The stormtroopers actually were based on the Klan. They were.
That's an interesting point. I didn't know that.
I went to the Star Wars Museum in Chicago, and while a lot of the uniforms that they had on the Death Star were based on the Nazi uniforms. If you take a look at the stormtroopers on Hoth, they look a lot like the Klan. And so what he did is he wanted to make a space outrageous futuristic looking Klan. And so that's why he created them to be the bad guys. That's why we see the stormtroopers as white, because he wanted to make them look like a space age Klan kind of thing. So
I went to the Star Wars Museum in Arkansas, and it was a guy's private toy collection, and I got gypped out of $30 to look at some guy's toys, which was not a real Star Wars museum.
Well, they're going to open one, I guess, in San Francisco, I guess. You're going to open up the Star Wars Museum so people can go in and see everything and how it was inspired. But, being inspired by propaganda in order to create an image, I mean, even if you remember when Bush landed on the Abraham Lincoln, that was taken right out of Leni Riefenstahl's film, where he landed that plane on the Abraham Lincoln and got out of it. It's just like right out of Triumph of the Will. I was surprised that no one caught that.
Well, we were mentioning films. I think if you look at like Jerry Bruckheimer films, for example, he was actually directly involved in consulting on the Jessica Lynch scenario, and that was the whole idea of, we need to have women on the front lines, women in the military. There's a BBC article that is still posted, is still public, that discusses him consulting on how to sell that to the public. And what you need is these kind of so-called stories based in so-called real scenarios, which are all just made up. They're just scripted. And
like the plane going down in Pennsylvania?
Yeah.
I mean, I heard that too was something that was consulted on, because they didn't know what to do with the story about a plane being shot out of the sky, and so they had to create some scenario that wasn't real. And in fact, if you hear, both Cheney and Rumsfeld have slipped many times saying that they shot that plane out of the sky. Jay Dyer with us tonight on Ground Zero, 888-673-3700. Hollywood is full of propaganda, and they award it. Create heroes. They use films to do so. We have like films, The Sniper, and we had Zero Dark 30 that was about the Osama bin Laden raid. When they want to push a certain type of fiction, they'll use Hollywood to do it. And I think it was interesting to note that a lot of this, some of the more, I guess you could say, blatant examples were during the Obama administration. Wouldn't you agree, Jay?
Yeah, actually, I was going to mention, we were talking about white helmets. The work of Vanessa Beeley and Ava Bartlett and Patrick Henningsen is pretty top-notch over 21st Century Wire, and they have a whole bunch of articles. But even outside of that, in the mainstream press, back in November of 2014, the New York Times reported on Norwegian filmmakers being busted for filming fake Syria videos. A similar story around the same time, 2016, Egyptian police arrest 5 people for using children to stage fake Aleppo footage, and that's out of The Independent. So both New York Times and The Independent have commented on this. We've actually collected together, I've done a video that's about 2 hours long where I collect together as many of the clips that relate to this as I could find that actually demonstrate usage of totally staged and fake videos. Not just my opinion, but actually instances of people being caught doing this. And so like the BBC, and if you remember the story of Syrian Danny and the chlorine gas false flag nonsense that they were talking about, these are all examples. And actually when you start chronicling these, there's more than you can keep up with. There's actually so many examples of this. And what you start to realize is, okay, so White Helmets is basically a film crew / first responder group that's able to get there on the scene ASAP and construct the narrative.
Right.
And they're constructing the narrative, obviously, for the CIA, for the West, for the UK Foreign Office, who's funding them, who's put the millions of dollars into this so-called humanitarian organization, but it's not. It's just a complete propaganda front. And what's funny about that is that I was reviewing a lot of Kubrick films recently for a TV show I'm working on, and I noticed as I was watching Full Metal Jacket, I haven't watched that in probably 8 years, when the Joker character, who's the guy who lives through the big guy who commits suicide and kills the drill sergeant, the next phase of the film, the second act of the film, the main character's Joker. And if you remember what his role is, it's to go to Vietnam as a journalist, quote unquote. And his whole job is to basically be like Winston in 1984 and craft and create news stories for the people back home. And his PSYOPs guy, then they're actually doing psychological warfare there. His PSYOPs head guy says, look, Joker, we want two kinds of stories. We want the GI who's a hero and gives to the local Vietnamese. And we want the story of the guy who's, dying for America. He says, don't tell us any other stories. That's the only two we want. That's all that's here.
Like Good Morning Vietnam, the character that Robin Williams played. They told him that he was only to report certain things, and he couldn't, put himself up to doing that. In fact, it was basically a jump, or at least a rebellion against propaganda. And that now, we're throwing ourselves deeply into it. And Hollywood is going to push it a lot more now because they have a way to do it. All they have to do is dangle the newspeak of fake news over people's heads. And immediately you can, and a critic can be paid off to say, don't believe this film or don't talk about the film. But as you say, it makes it sound like, that Jake Gyllenhaal film, Nightcrawlers. Yeah. Where they were there, they had the cameras there first, they were able to get the story first for the news crew. If it bleeds, it leads. They, on the other hand, these same guys, the white helmets, are there before the civil defense people even show up. They show up even before the people who are supposed to respond show up. So they have their cameras there and they're ready to go, and that's what they say. They say it's weird. We don't know where they come from. They just show up before we do. They go in and they wrestle bears and take out, armaments and everything with their bare hands, and we just stand there going, how do they do it, and how are they being funded? And now we realize that they're being funded by groups, British intelligence and NATO, and in fact, was it Jihad Johnny? I think that was his name. He actually had ties to British intelligence, and so that's why people are putting into question the possibility that he was the guy that beheaded one of the first videos we saw of beheadings going on. And that's why there were so many people on the internet that were questioning whether or not what we were seeing was truth or if it was faked.
Exactly, yeah. Tony Carlucci actually wrote a good book that's a free ebook online that details the first couple years of what's going on in Syria, and it's really good, and it gives you all the details. And he actually talks about, he's citing like the big white papers and think tanks that were writing about foreign policy type magazines saying, it's time to get rid of Assad, like years ahead of time, prepping for this whole scenario. So we know that the wars are planned years ahead of time. And during that, within that phase, what they're doing is setting up all this kind of stuff. They're setting up these groups. They're sending in humanitarian, quote unquote, organizations that are going to kind of make contacts in the local region and talk about so-called democracy, so-called women's rights, and all this kind of stuff, which they're not really into because we know that they're actually directly tied to ISIS, to Al-Qaeda. And that's why you had John McCain going over there a few years ago and just openly taking pictures with these Al-Nusra Front guys, right, who are tangentially connected to, or some of them actually part of ISIS and Al-Qaeda.
Yeah, and in fact, he's still doing it. I mean, he's certainly doing this, and yet we can jump all over Donald Trump, and everybody's talking about the Russians and everything else. But whatever happened to the negotiations going on with these groups in Syria and ISIS, and everybody forgets about that. And now, for some reason, we have the left praising John McCain for what he's doing, and CNN did a whole thing the other day with Lindsey Graham and John McCain. I'm thinking, they're having a town hall meeting with these guys? Why? Are they about to die? I mean, what do we care what they say?
Clyde, this is John McCain. I fought in the War of 1812. Clyde, I fought on the side of ISIS back in 1812 in the war. And I'm a POW hero.
Oh, my
You got to support ISIS. They're great Americans.
Oh, my gosh. And that's the thing, is even Lindsey Graham was calling him probably the greatest American hero that ever lived. If I was McCain, I would have punched him right in the face. I would have said, "Oh, come on."
Yeah, him and Milli Vanilli. Like you mentioned Milli Vanilli earlier. Somebody did. But, yeah, he's a hero in the way that Milli Vanilli is a Grammy winner or whatever.
I don't know. People I'm sure will have their opinions, but just what's going on. It's so obvious to me. I mean, it used to be. I think the propaganda was harder to spot than it is today. I think that it's easier to spot it now because those of us who are aware can see it, and we point it out to people, and they'll go, "Oh, no, don't say that. That's not true." But it is true. Even if it's based on something that you think, should be covered, it's the way they cover it, and the way they sweeten it, and the way they make it look. I mean, there's, like I say, I'm not dogging on all war movies because I like some of them. But, I just don't like it when I feel like that I'm being hit with a cudgel on how important these people are, how great they are. And then, they get up there and they make their pitch for, ending the war in Syria. And I'm like thinking, well, okay, how do we end it? Oh, I know how we end it. We got to take out Assad. That's how you wanted to end. And, and yet we take out a bunch of Christians in the process and everybody else that's there. And the big problem is ISIS. I don't know. I'm just losing track of who we're siding with and who we're against anymore.
Yeah, it makes me think of Red Dawn. I like Red Dawn just because it's so goofy. A bunch of teenagers that are like 14-year-old, 15 supposed to be. Mm-hmm. They're going to stop the entire Soviet army or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Really, but it's funny. It's goofy, and I almost think it's kind of. It understands that about itself. It's not taking itself that seriously, but we're actually supposed to take this, all this, the propaganda in our day. We're supposed to take this seriously. Mm-hmm. And it's even more ridiculous. It's even more crazy than something like Red Dawn.
Well, I've been looking over, doing my research, and on multiple occasions, the white helmets have been exposed, staging rescue scenes for both photo and video. They recycled images of children and incidents from conflicts in Syria from way back. And it's all there to support their narrative. They edit video, which misrepresents the scene in question. They use images from, like I said, previous incidents, or they fake images altogether. And there are many documented instances of this. But, it's nothing new because we know that back in 2003, following the invasion of Iraq, the Pentagon paid a PR firm called Bell and Pottinger $540 million to produce a fake terror video used to steer Western political interests towards their war. So, I mean, they're into making agitprop, and people fall for the agitprop.
Yeah, and you've got W. Seniors saying Saddam's throwing babies out of incubators.
Oh, yeah, that was fake. That was a fake story. And do people remember how fake that was? They hired that girl to basically cry and say she saw soldiers going in Kuwait and ripping babies out of incubators. Never happened. It was all a lie, and people fell for it.
Yeah, and she was from some rich Bahrain family, and she was an actress, so that was part of that Bell Pottinger PR that you're talking about,
right?
So this is what they've done every time. They've been doing this. You start to notice the pattern that they run these kinds of stories, and then you'll notice that the media, mainstream media, especially in the West, is tied into and connected to the NGO and the kind of provocateur agitprop stuff on the ground, who's able to coordinate this kind of stuff, and then they create the news story to craft a narrative. Mm-hmm. This was even in Hunger Games, right? If you remember in the recent Hunger Games, by the third book or the third film, Katniss's whole role is to just be this kind of war propaganda icon or trademark.
She's face of the war, face of the struggle.
She's the face of the war, and they're all like, "Oh, let's get a better camera shot of you over here by all the bodies," and this kind of stuff. Yeah, because that's what really goes on here. This is how you sell the war, and this is what Wag the Dog showed us, right? Right. Willie Nelson's gonna sing songs about saving America and stuff to sell a war.
That's right, and that's exactly how it's done. And I think a lot of people, if they haven't seen the movie Wag the Dog, should pay attention to that film, because it did pretty much, open your mind to the idea that anything can be done in a studio to get you to provoke an action. And now they're handing Academy Awards to these movies. 888-673-3700. That's 888-673-3700. Recovering from an infection I had, I was able to see some of these entertainment shows, and they were still reeling about the mistake that was made at the Academy Awards. And I figured one of the biggest mistakes they made was not naming the wrong picture for Best Picture, but they actually gave an Academy Award to a film that was mostly propaganda about a group called the White Helmets. And there have been many occasions where we've seen how this group has lied about what they've done, and most certainly is a tool, a propaganda tool for Western media so that they can feel good about the war in Syria. And so giving an award to a film about this topic, I thought was one of the biggest mess-ups at the Employee of the Year award, which I think that is what the Oscars are. They're basically Employee of the Year award ceremonies for actors And I think this is what happens. A lot of them have to campaign. I mean, I found that out too, that a lot of this, Jay, a lot of this pomp and circumstance is based primarily on how well a movie company and an actor pay money and campaign for the awards. It's not about talent or box office. It's about how well they campaign. Do you know about that?
I have heard some of that. Yeah, that's interesting. It's no surprise, I don't guess, that most things in our society are not what they appear to be. And, you can think of like different papal candidates campaigning to be elected pope or something.
Right.
It's no different in terms of the papacy. And one of the books that I looked to when I was writing my book that touches on what you're getting at is called Operation Hollywood. And it's been out for a while, but it's a collection of academics who put together essays that analyze the relationship between the Pentagon and Hollywood and the military and all this kind of stuff. And it's unbelievable, really, the degree of censorship that's gone on. And so just the very idea that we have like a free arts, that the arts is a realm of freedom. It's analogous to academia. We think of it as free inquiry, and that's not really what it is. It's very controlled. It's very censored. If you don't say the right things, talk about the right things, sell the right things, as you're talking about, then you're not going to go very far in that field. You're not going to be promoted. So it's very much a top-down system that you're talking about, and you don't get ahead, unless you follow the rules. And so it's very, very different from the idea that we have that the arts is a realm of freedom and free expression and creativity.
So as I was saying before about film, in your book, you also cover what some people call predictive programming and the idea of force structuring in films. Do you think there's inside information that's given to directors and they put it in films to warn or somehow convince people? Is there really a revelation of the method where secret societies have to reveal what they're about to do before they do it? I mean, what is your opinion on these things?
I'd say all the above is involved because you've got people who are going to be working. The most basic example of that is, advertising. Everybody knows about product placement, and this really kicked off with the Bond series. That's where it was really successful, and they realized that they could really get a lot of mileage out of actors and actresses and studios promoting, Baby Ruth or Aston Martin or whatever, Omega watches. And so if that's the case, then it just sort of logically follows that, well, what else could we sell? And if we can sell products, can we sell ideas? Can we sell social changes? Can we sell changes to, morals and taboos and this kind of stuff? And absolutely, right? That's what they figured out. You can sell war, right? So, but on a deeper level, I would argue that, yes, you can actually also, if you have a kind of esoteric or occultic type perspective, as a lot of directors even talk about, they'll even mention it here and there. You go see something like True Detective, and you're seeing the kind of stuff that we see coming out later in a lot of these arrests that deal with human trafficking. There have been like 1,500 arrests in the last couple of months related to human trafficking. Well, this is all I'm thinking this is what I saw in True Detective season 1. Right? There's all this human trafficking going on, and whether that was people, good guys in the system trying to get a message out, or whether it's predictive programming, that's always hard to figure out because it's difficult to read people's motives and intentions, obviously. But I would say that because humans are humans, that all the above is going on.
What about crowd moving? I mean, there's an idea that, films, you can watch them and it creates a sort of a crowd movement towards certain things. I remember reading a film fact, that after 9/11 happened, there was a spike in rentals of Independence Day. And they say the reason why was because a lot of people remember the scenes in Independence Day where all the buildings came down, and they were curious as to how accurate it was to 9/11, and so they'd go out and they'd rent this film so they could watch it because they were drawn to it. And so, go ahead.
Well, believe it or not, there's actually a mainline professor, Elliot Gaines, wrote a famous scholarly journal essay about Independence Day and 9/11 and how many pre-signifiers of 9/11 were in that film. Now, he has absolutely no interest in conspiracy theories, and I believe he even says this in this famous essay. It's still online. You can still find it. Elliot Gaines, as I said. And he says, look, I'm not coming at this from a conspiratorial perspective. I'm just looking at the movie, which comes out obviously way ahead of time before the events of 9/11. Same type of stuff goes on in, The Matrix. You have Neo's passport reads September 11, 2001. The Matrix came out in 1998. You've got these examples of this, and he's saying, look, I can't tell you exactly why this is happening, but it does seem like, it suggests the idea of conditioning the population to see the villain in like the Arab, right? There was a lot of movies in the 80s, a lot of Disney movies that had the Arab as the villain, and this perhaps was preparing us for, Desert Storm and then 9/11. And so I do believe those things are intentionally planned at times. And there's even secular scholarship to back that up.
Well, there are people that say that The Simpsons have been notorious. The television show The Simpsons has been notorious in things like predicting 9/11 and even the Trump presidency. What do you have to say to that?
Well, what I would do is look at where do the people that are the writers for that show, where do they go to school? And some of those people, I think it's called Evergreen or something like that. It's a private school that some of these comedians and writers have come out of. And it's very well connected. And there's an old, you can find interviews with Dean Haglund where he said from the X-Files, where he says, we would have CIA people on the set of the X-Files and Lone Gunman kind of telling us what they
what we should do. I interviewed Haglund on the anniversary of 9/11. Actually, he was here, and the reason why I interviewed him is because the very reason was because of the movie of the TV show pilot for the Lone Gunman, where just months before 9/11, they had a plane that was programmed, or at least in the television show, a plane that was programmed to crash into the World Trade Center. And go ahead.
One of the things I talk about in the book is that point that a lot of the science fiction that we saw in the 70s or 80s is the world that we live in today, kind of the predictive, maybe dystopian type stuff. We're used to the kind of things that we saw in Running Man, with Arnold Schwarzenegger from 1987. He's using the internet in that movie, actually. Yeah. And here we are, it's a normal daily activity in the world of Running Man in the 1980s, in Arnold's future dystopia. Nobody in the internet, or in 1987, knew the internet was. 99.9% of the population. Maybe you worked at some military base or something, or Stanford Research, you knew about the internet, but most people didn't. So it's the norm in our day. So I posit in my book that the science fiction that we see in our day, in the last 10 years or so, and what's coming out now is probably preparing us for what we're going to see in the next 15, 20 years.
Well, yeah. So, it's interesting you say that, because it just seems to me that maybe a lot of writers say, it's cool if we go to the CIA party, because we could overhear, agents that are drinking talk about things that may be happening that are not really all that, they're not newsworthy now, but we can make them into stories, science fiction stories that eventually come true,
Well, this is how Philip K. Dick, I think, understood and put a lot of predictive programming into his fiction. Like Ubik, you've got the internet. How well he was talking to and hanging out with all the Silicon Valley people. So he knew ahead of time. And I think something analogous goes on that you're talking about there with, the CIA consultants. So these people who, like Chase Brandon, Milt Bearden, Robert Baer, these kind of connects between the world of Hollywood and so-called intelligence.
Well, Ray Bradbury, I don't know if it was in Illustrated Man or in Martian Chronicles, he predicted video games, interactive video games and virtual reality, where said kids would walk into a room and they would hunt animals. And so they turned their whole room into a jungle where they're hunting these life-size animals. And it's real to them, but then they disappear after they're shot. And so now we have virtual reality, we have VR, we have all this stuff. And so many things that Bradbury had put in his books are coming true. So, I mean, and you look at, phones like the tricorders in Star Trek, grids that were in Star Trek. So a lot of things, are set in comic books and in movies, but it just seems to me that people are more mesmerized by the force structuring in films, and I am too, because I've analyzed 9/11, what we call imagery, and everything from Back to the Future to Sesame Street. And of course, once again, we go back to The Simpsons where, they had that show where they went to New York and Lisa or the baby holds up a magazine and it says New York and it goes 9 and then you see the Twin Towers. So, New York on $9. So it was 9/11. It said on the magazine. And it's like, wow. And where do they stay? They're at the World Trade Center and I guess, Homer is, he has a shoe boot on his car and they have to get it out of there.
Yeah, well, the destruction of kind of archetypal symbols, and that's really what 9/11 was, is ultimately intended, as you know, to affect the mass subconscious, and that's what it does. It's intended really to traumatize us on a mass scale. And I mentioned Kubrick films earlier. I rewatched Clockwork Orange as well, and just wrote a big, pretty lengthy analysis of that I posted. And one thing I noticed this time around, I hadn't seen it in a few years, was that when Alex, the central thug character, is taken into his Ludovico treatment, they call it.
Yeah.
This is really just mind control and MK Ultra in terms of Hollywood. He's put into a movie theater,
right,
and he's watching a bunch of traumatic imagery. And in fact, he's even watching at one point his own group of thugs rape and kill, right, which happens earlier in the film. Mm-hmm. So, in other words, we are Alex, right, in the movie theater, being traumatized by the imagery that we're seeing on these screens. And so that's what the fictional narratives are intended to do, is to give us the download, to tell us the story, the narrative, more so even than at CNN, right? I mean, people are going to get the story about Chris Kyle from American Sniper, not from CNN or Fox.
Right, because we're highly entertained, but we certainly aren't all that educated. We're here with Jay Dyer on Ground Zero. We're going to get to some phone calls at 888-673-3700. That's 888-673-3700. We'll be back.
FM News 101 KXL.
Back to Ground Zero with Clyde Lewis on FM News 101.
Jay Dyer was with us tonight on Ground Zero. Esoteric Hollywood Sex, Cults, and Symbols in Film is the book. We go to Nick in Montana. Hi, Nick. You're on Ground Zero with Jay Dyer. Go ahead.
Yeah, hi, Clyde. I'm glad to hear you're out and about. Hi, Jay. Hello? Can you hear me?
Yeah, Jay's there. Go ahead.
Hey.
Yeah, I believe it has something to do with the 33rd. It's a blood sacrifice.
What's a blood sacrifice?
What's going on? Well, for instance, the white helmets there in Syria at 33rd parallel.
Uh-huh.
And how it ties into Warren Beatty and all that was, it was 33 years from 1934 to 1967. It was 50, apparently why they were chosen to host the Oscars, because it was 50 years since Bonnie and Clyde came out with the Jubilee. And also it was 33 years from the statehood of New Mexico to the Trinity test. And how that ties in with Clyde is that he was a blood sacrifice. He wasn't given an opportunity to surrender, and they shot him, Bonnie, and the 34 Ford with 160 bullets.
Uh-huh.
Okay, and he was born in Dallas. He died at a very close parallel to the 33rd parallel, and he was buried at the 33rd parallel.
So you're saying so many 33s, and you think that's how or why it was done? The mistake was something that was a coincidence based on the 33s? Is that what you're telling me?
Well, yeah, I think so, because also with the mayhem that happened at the Oscars and stuff, it was kind of like the Bonnie and Clyde story, where they thought things were going pretty good and they weren't.
Mm-hmm.
And that also that Faye Dunaway had remember reading that she closely identified with Bonnie Parker. And then also the Trinity site is actually, if you add the Bonnie and Clyde ambush site latitude with the Trinity site, if you add 13 minutes and 30 seconds, you come out almost identically. I think it's 1 second off. I was trying to do the math while I was on the phone.
So what, are you just shooting from the hip? You just shooting from the hip here is what you're doing? No, you're not. So you've researched this?
Yeah, 33 years from 1934 to 1967.
Well, okay, but I'm just saying, you researched you saw this happen and you researched it using the 33 toponymy theory.
Well, I heard your excellent show, or at least a couple of them, on the 33rd parallel, and I started doing some
Can't kill 33.
The parallels.
Yeah, well, a lot of weird things do happen on the 33rd parallel. You're right. Uh-huh.
And also out in Carlsbad, New Mexico, was the farthest west place that Clyde did his depredations. And so that would bring it. And also New Mexico was founded in 1912, and 33 years later there was a Trinity test.
So we're sensing a Bonnie and Clyde Trinity theme here going on with this whole thing. That they played Bonnie and Clyde. Yeah, it's pretty amazing, actually. I'm just sitting here. I'm trying to keep track. That's what I'm doing.
Well, it's just not, 33, you just don't throw it in and get them. It seems like an ongoing thing, like we know Dallas.
Yeah.
And,
well, it's like the 9/11 thing that Jay was 9/11 Jay was talking about, is that we see this number symbology, and as the number symbology appears, like in films, like I said in The Simpsons. I mean, people always point to The Simpsons as being like a force structuring tool, and boy, what's really funny, Jay, is how many people see like numbers in The Simpsons and immediately they throw up on the internet. It's going to be a doomsday thing going on at that time, and it's just hilarious because yeah, go ahead, Jay.
Well, I was just going to say the Warren Beatty conspiracy aspect that comes to mind when I think about Hollywood is his role in Parallax View.
Yeah,
if I recall, because he plays. Film. Yeah, exactly. He plays the mind controlled patsy who undergoes an MK Ultra type process, just like Alex in Clockwork Orange, where they strap him down.
What about Bulworth?
That they got snubbed at the Oscars.
Yeah.
Everybody was going to boycott everything.
Yeah.
2016, they did very well.
Uh-huh.
If they had screwed up with the envelopes, which I don't see how they could do that, the big story the next day would have been that. Not the envelope. It would have been that the African Americans swept.
Well, I lean towards your cynical view. I did in the beginning. I actually said, what this does is, like you say, they called attention to the fact that Hollywood isn't black enough or diverse enough. Not enough black characters getting Oscars. Then it was not enough gay characters getting Oscars. And then now we have a film that was mistaken, and they give it to, this other film, Moonlight. And Moonlight is about a gay black man. So there you kill two birds with one stone.
Personally, I was rooting for Hidden Figures.
Oh, yeah. It's a great film.
It's not that I'm, but I mean, when it adds up like
that. What about Fences? I was thinking Denzel would get something for Fences. He's always a favorite.
Yeah, he was pretty scary in that role. It reminded me of my father. But that's my take on it. I don't mean to sound rude, but.
No, you don't sound rude at all. I think a lot of people were cynical in that respect because of the fact that, there could have been, Fences or, like you say, the Figures film about NASA. I think that.
Yeah, I thought that was a great movie.
Yeah.
But, in 100 years, they never made a mistake, and they make one now.
Yeah, it's interesting how that happened.
All right, well.
Tony, thank you.
Keep up the good work, guys.
Thank you for the call. And Jay, what about the idea that was a political move? That maybe they drew attention to the fact that, don't fret, guys, we're doing our best here. Because he's right. In 100 years, that's never happened that we know of.
I think it was a publicity stunt. I think a lot of these kind of so-called flubs and issues like this are engineered.
Yeah.
Like Kanye storming up there and taking the award or something like that. I think this kind of stuff is put on.
Yeah.
Often.
I think so. Yeah, a lot of it's all Hollywood, as they say. And that's the thing. And it is. A lot of it's propaganda, and war's a stage anymore. I mean, the idea of a war has to be staged correctly, or no one's going to pay attention to it. I always tell this story, and it's a true story. I was working the morning that Shock and Awe happened, and I had a friend of mine who worked at a CNN affiliate, and he told me, he says, "You're not going to believe this." And he says, "And if you say that I told you, I'm going to deny it, but I'm going to tell you anyway." And I go, "What's that?" And he says, Shock and Awe campaign happened. You're going to be seeing it on CNN. And I said, really? He says, yeah. He says, but you know what the problem is with it? And I said, what's that? He says, you can't hear the bombs going off. And so I had to go in and get some sound effects and put bombs in there so you could hear them going off. Because it didn't have the impact they wanted. Anyway.
I've seen the Charles Jaco clip, so I believe it. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah, that's pretty bad, though. That is just terrible. That's the worst thing ever. Let's go to Paul in Texas. Hi, Paul. You're on Ground Zero.
Hey, Clyde. Good show.
Thank you.
Thanks for being on. Thanks for being on, Mr. Dyer. Hey, I just wanted to mention a couple movies. You were talking about things that were used back in, to recruit for the military. I remember when the movie Iron Eagle came out.
Yeah.
And that was 86.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And Top Gun.
Oh, yeah.
Was in 87.
Uh-huh.
And then the movie Firebirds. Firebirds was in 1990.
Yeah.
And that was all right before Desert. That was all right before Desert Storm.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but, and the thing that's interesting is, like I was saying earlier, I mean, a guy was calling me, and I actually said that movies like the X-Men and Battle L.A. are recruitment films. Battle L.A. was a recruitment film for the Marines, and Battleship was a recruitment film for the Navy. They actually allowed the use of a battleship, and it never used to be that way. They never used to allow the military to use or have anybody use military planes, tanks, or anything for alien films. And now they do, because they realize that science fiction films are great recruitment tools for, and in fact, Independence Day, the second one, was completely endorsed by the Army. In fact, they were having fake commercials for the military saving us from the aliens.
Yep, exactly.
and that's propaganda wrapped up for you right there. And they weren't even trying to hide it. They had those commercials, and they were always going, "Have you seen this commercial about this guy's daughter fighting against the aliens back the war of '96?" They called it, and it was a
commercial.
Yeah, commercial for Independence Day, but it was there to recruit people for the Army.
Right, and I was just curious if Jay had ever taken. I was just wondering if Jay had ever taken a look at some music videos. Because like Soundgarden's Black Hole Sun, I never realized how much symbolism was in it until I got older, and I started delving into metaphysics and things like that.
Oh yeah.
And there's a ton of symbology in that music video.
That's a creepy video.
Yeah.
Creepy video.
Yeah, it was 1994.
Neil deGrasse Tyson even commented how creepy it was, but he said that if a black hole was ever to hit us, we'd flatten out first before we got sucked into it.
Would we all become Spoon Man?
Yeah, pretty much.
And he would know.
Well, yeah, and I would say I think listening to Soundgarden with the black hole sucks us up would be hell too, but that's another story.
Hey, and then you were mentioning The Simpsons.
Yes.
And I noticed you use a clip from Family Guy. Where they're in New York and they're going to the actual site.
Yes.
Of Ground Zero.
Uh-huh.
And then just the last sentence. The end of the last sentence, Do
you think we should go to war with Iran? That's it, that line?
Well, we got John McCain. He's still alive.
Uh-huh. I know.
And we got Mike Pence, and Mike Pence has been quoted back in September by ABC.
Right.
He said his role model for vice president is Dick Cheney.
Right. And we're sorry.
Pretty scary.
Yeah, it is pretty scary when you have Darth Vader as your mentor. It really is. It's really scary stuff.
Yep.
Paul, thank you for the call. I really appreciate it. Guys on the ball there. You don't want that. Let's go to Jeff in Kentucky. Hi, Jeff. You're on Ground Zero.
Clyde, one of the best propaganda movies was Bridge on the River Kwai, and it won the Oscar in 1957.
Okay.
I can remember seeing an interview with a veteran about 10 years ago. He was one of the prisoners that survived the ordeal.
Mm-hmm.
And he said that the prisoners, they had thousands of prisoners, and none of the prisoners would be talked to the guards, but just the officers.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, those poor prisoners, they were totally humiliated and abused.
Right.
They make demands on those Japanese soldiers was just ridiculous,
Mm-hmm.
But I think, I guess they're just trying to uplift everybody's spirit or give them recognition or something. But
I think a lot of times, though, they soften it. They do a lot of softening of things, or they try to, they try to glorify things. I know that if you ask a person, if you ask just a person on the street about World War II, and who were the first to bring down Germany, people say America was. But no, it was the Russians. The Russians took Berlin before America ever did. And they were the first to take down the concentration camps before America did. But they're not going to tell you that because that doesn't make us look good. But, I mean, it was a joint effort. But, I mean, we did a good job at closing down a lot of the concentration camps as well. But most people, they don't know that. And that's because most films depict America as being the victors at World War II and basically taking everything down. I mean, the only victory I think that we can claim is the victory over Japan, and we used the bomb to do it. So, I mean, the victory was had by both, but the Russians lost a lot more men over World War II than I think we did, actually.
Yeah. Well, the interview that I saw with the veteran who was a prisoner, he said that if any of the prisoners spoke to the guards or the Japanese guards, the guards would just shoot them and just bring out the prisoners. He said there was no type of any kind of demands made on those. Now, he did say they sabotaged the bridge. I think maybe that part of the story was true.
Yeah.
But they did bring down the bridge back.
Well, Jeff, I appreciate the call. Thank you so much for that information.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Let's go to Barrett in Texas. Hi, Barrett. You're on Ground Zero. Barrett in Texas. Hi.
Yeah.
You're on the air. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Speakerphone here. I didn't see you. I couldn't hear you coming.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. There was a movie out last year. It was a really good movie about a director who was blacklisted in the early 60s and late 50s. Not director, a writer, screenwriter, and he wrote Spartacus. And it was a real good movie. It was played by the guy that was in Breaking Bad.
Trumbull, yeah.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Okay, talk about propaganda. That was the most blatant communist propaganda I've ever seen in my life. Now, first of all, the guy is, the movie starts out, he's talking to his daughter, and he makes a scenario to his daughter why communism is good, and the scenario is totally bogus. And I almost walked out of the theater, but as an amateur screenwriter, I stayed because it was about a screenwriter, and it turned out to be a lot better than it started. But all through the movie, he's bad-mouthing the ways of America, and he's becoming a millionaire in America.
Well, I don't know if that's propaganda. That's basically a guy who did that. He's a character. I mean, you have characters like that. I mean, I don't think they're selling you on the idea that, communism is good and American way of life is bad. There's just some guy.
They were selling communism is good. But can I ask Mr. Dyer a question, please?
Okay, go ahead.
There's a movie that just recently won Best Picture. It beat out that other movie. Heck, I should have looked this stuff up before I called. But it's now by the film festivals. It's now considered the best movie, and it was Hitchcock's Vertigo. And Vertigo has hidden messages in it that I've been writing about for about 30 years. Hidden message. Well, I won't get into hidden message. If I did, I'd have to talk for 15 minutes. But it's a brilliant masterpiece that's only just now, in retrospect, it's easier to see things when you have decades to look through. And what is your opinion on that, Mr. Dyer, on Vertigo?
Well, I have a chapter on Vertigo in my book, and I do believe that it's talking about things like mind control. It deals with Hitchcock's fascination with voyeurism, and it's about a lot of things. So, Jimmy Stewart's character goes to a clinic and is basically comes out of this clinic, thinking that he's lost his mind, and he does kind of lose his mind, right? And then the Kim Novak character plays two alternate personality roles, the doubling phenomenon, which is common in Hitchcock movies. So there's a whole bunch of stuff going on there. Yeah. So okay, I
want to go back to before we have to go to break quickly. I just don't know how a film about an unrepentant Hollywood communist is communist propaganda when there were Hollywood communists back in the day. I don't understand how that was a sell job on communism. Can you explain that somehow? Are you there?
I can tell you that a good film that actually lampoons this was the recent Coen Brothers movie, which I think is probably a more accurate portrayal of communists in Hollywood, which is Hail Caesar.
Oh, I love Hail Caesar. That was funny.
Yeah.
It's really
funny.
Yeah. And
you've got like 5 or 10, academics that are, trying to infiltrate and destroy Hollywood. And it's just like this really futile effort. And it's a good satire.
Yeah, I like that too. You couldn't answer that question. I just wanted to, I mean, when you're depicting someone who's an unrepentant communist in Hollywood, I don't think you're trying to sell anybody on the idea of communism being good. I think you're kind of doing a profile, you see, awarding certain movies that bring about certain agendas. We know, and I've interviewed John Coleman before on the program, that in his book, Committee of 300, it's documented that there have been plans in the works to socially engineer the populace into accepting what would be called a controlled superstate. And this super government can only be implemented if the people demand it. And the way that you get a people to demand this type of superstate is to create propaganda to make it look king to the intellect. The way you engineer the people, the way you engineer society, socially engineered society, is through a lot of shocks and traumas to the system, which manipulate and wear down the populace into adjusting their principles for the coming changes. I was talking with a chaplain today at the hospital that I was at. And as I said, it's a religious hospital, and the chaplain I spoke with, very smart man, studied a lot of religion and Bible, and we were discussing the idea of lowering the bar a bit. Basically, the way we wear down the populace into adjusting their principles, their morality, in order to accept the coming changes, no matter how uncomfortable they may be. And movies help in that regard. I mean, if you look at movies now as opposed to the way they were, people say, well, nothing's really changed. I think the subject matter, though, and what's available to younger people has changed. I know that many things that scared us when we saw horror films when we were kids don't scare kids today. And it's kind of hard to scare kids today because they have a lot of things that scare them in real life. But I think it becomes evident that what is happening now in the world seems to be planned and permitted. And there's always been that saying, all the world is a stage. Well, many events that we see are staged. Many events have a little Hollywood put in there because, you know, when you see changes happening and the way they bait it, the way they time it, timing is everything. And when you're dealing with things like racial tensions, when you hear about health and you hear about the resurrection of racism and all these things, these are all pieces that are fitting into place from divergent realms, different players, and different actors. So you have it exposed to you in television shows, and what it does is it validates, in a way, some of the things that have been wanted to be said, but are not allowed to be said. I was noticing there's going to be a TV show on ABC called We Will Rise, and it's a TV show actually about homosexuality and about the rise of homosexuals. And I'm thinking, well, I wonder how that will go over when it only appeals to probably 1 or 2% of the country that may be gay or homosexual, or, you know, and I'm just wondering, is this a validation? And would it be seen as a validation? Because, you know, a lot of people want their stories to be told, but will it tell that story? That is such an interesting place to go. But when you're looking at the gears and the levers that are being turned and pushed and pulled, and how gears and levers in history have been moved and adjusted, and large-scale cognitive dissonance has been played to get people divided. If you use real nightmare scenarios and put them in film, if you play this game well, there are winners and losers, and we see them at the Academy Awards. We are witnessing and will continue to witness movies that will become adjusted in order to bring about change, and how we treat each other as a family, and how acceptance for certain ways of life will be seen and accepted and validated. I mean, this is change that has now arrived. It's part of life. And I'm not saying that art doesn't reflect life, but art has a tendency to also now force structure life. Many people are demonstrating now that they have been psychologically bruised or programmed or traumatized, and they have changed the way they are. And it's because life itself has not met the expectations they're looking for. And so when that happens, you start seeing a lot of films reflecting that kind of attitude. I mean, when we were heading up to 2000, a lot of films were about the apocalypse. And even now, there are many apocalyptic-themed films. But there's also an increase of military films. And it's because we're fighting this constant war. It's like the 2 minutes of hate that 1984 depicted with Emmanuel Goldstein, who was the vision of hate, put his face on the screen and people would shout and scream and yell. Well, they do the same thing with propaganda. You find an enemy, you focus on the enemy, and when the government puts a lot of money out to enhance heroes or create heroes that don't exist, and then give them awards, this is where I shake my head and say, America has fallen for the propaganda. And that's exactly what I felt when I had heard that White Helmets was getting an award for Best Picture, Best Documentary Short. And I thought, once again, America, they hear Hollywood gripe and complain about how this is that, and people complain there's not enough diversity, not enough gay roles, not enough black roles, not enough this, not enough that. What we're not lacking in is the CIA putting their hands on our media and putting their hands on our films. I mean, we've talked about Operation Mockingbird on this program before. And I don't know if it sinks in at all. I don't know if anyone understands just what it means to have the CIA or agents in films, working on films, producing films, or I don't know if they know the importance of having agents pretty much occupying the seats at places like CNN and, Fox News. But it happens, and it goes on and on and on and on. And people seem to think that what the Academy Awards are giving, they're giving awards for excellence, when in reality, it's all a campaign. And there's always this deeper link between the CIA and the media, and Hollywood is the media. No doubt about it. I mean, if you go back, and I remember talking about this, and I said that the Freedom of Information Act and demands from the people to get information from the CIA. There were 12 million declassified documents the CIA reportedly published online, and it was not always easy to get these Cold War era documents. But what it gave us were, of course, UFO documentation, which once again adds to the confirmation argument that I've made. It also talks about Project Stargate, which adds to the confirmation argument that I've made, that the government actually paid money for the First Earth Battalion to go out and try to do Psy War. But there's also the Psy-Op War. And when the CIA publishes these 12 million documents, and they have these intelligence files that make them easily accessible, you go through them, and every time I find something, every time when I'm at a loss for anything to talk about, all I have to do is thumb through some of these documents, and I see something. There's something. And so when you then stumble on the gold, when you get the smoking gun, I just want to tell you about it. And when it comes a time where, you see a synchronicity going on and you're saying, my gosh, man, I got to get this to the audience. And of course, you're laid up in a hospital for a day and a half. And then it just keeps being pushed in the mainstream of this flub up that happened at the Academy Awards. I'm thinking the flub up with the Academy Awards, and the flub up with Hollywood in general is they pretend, it's all a pretend show no matter what, even in spirit now, because if you go through these documents that I talked about with the UFOs and the CIA and the military and their psychics and everything else, they also reveal in these documents that they had files and documents on media organizations and movies, actors, studios, individual reporters. I mean, this is something I think is breakthrough and smoking gun for anyone who questions whether or not Hollywood is a tool or a propaganda arm for the military-industrial complex. If they're not an arm for the Pentagon with a lot of the movies they produce, some of them science fiction, some of them well-loved, some of them even including aliens and other fictional characters at the moment, because what they're doing is they're certainly trying to approximate a future and to reveal to you some of the things that are truly happening by wrapping them in fictional stories and disinformation. So when people tell you it's just like this movie or it reminds me of that movie, it's no accident that that's the case. It's no accident that people hear about things from movies long before they hear about them in news programs or from books. Because quite frankly, as they say, half jokingly, books lost, movies have won, in America at least. So if you see something in a movie, sometimes you'll say, oh, well, that's what it was about. I didn't have time to watch the news, or I didn't have time to read a book or read a newspaper about it. So I'm going to accept what Hollywood has to say about it. And they're counting on that. They're counting on you to not look into the situation. They're counting on you to allow Hollywood to rewrite that history. And that's what's disconcerting. When the CIA continues to be Hollywood's special agent, and they're the propaganda masters, and they're forming and pushing their ideologies onto you, and awarding themselves in a self-congratulatory manner, I shake my head and I say, you know what? I have to share this with my audience tonight. So that's what I'm doing. 888-673-3700. That's 888-673-3700. I'm Clyde Lewis. You're listening to Ground Zero. Your call's coming up. Don't go away.
FM News 101 KXL.
This is Ground Zero on FM News 101.
Go to Brian in Texas. Hi, Brian. You're on Ground Zero.
Hey, Clyde. I was originally going to talk. Let's just hit it in order. The original point of this call was about The Simpsons. I'm a lifelong fan of the show. I know you keep throwing them in there, because there's a lot of examples of synchronicity and all that.
There are. There are.
As someone who owns all the DVDs and has listened to the commentary tracks, because apparently I have nothing else to do, I can tell you that the writers and artists and the actors, everyone involved in that show is on our side on this. I mean, there's over 600 episodes.
What do you mean they're on our side?
Talk about everything.
What do you mean they're on our side? I don't understand what you mean.
I originally had a question for your guest that wrote the book. And
what was the question?
It was about Zack Snyder and specific movie Sucker Punch, that he's not on our side, at least in my opinion. That's someone who
Okay, but what do you mean that the Simpsons are on our side? I don't understand what you mean. There was nobody saying there were sides to be taken, in other words.
That's what I'm saying. I'm trying to clarify that they are trying to warn people. It's not predictive programming. They're not taking.
It is predictive programming.
Points from the CIA.
It is predictive programming. And the thing is they won't tell you. They won't tell you that. I mean, it's just like when I interviewed Haglund. He said, they went to parties and things were being said in parties and groups. And Grading's not a stupid man. I mean, he knows a lot what's going on. And people go to these parties. They overhear things. But the thing is, too, there are a lot of people that are in tune and intuitive, and that doesn't mean that they're in cahoots with the CIA. That doesn't mean that at all. It means that they wrote something and they were intuitive to it, and they caught on to something and they rode with it. It doesn't mean that they're an enemy. I mean, I don't know if you think that's what I imply, but that's not what I'm implying at all.
No, I don't think it's what you imply. What I'm trying to say is I don't think they belong in the group with some of the other people. That they do. Again,
look, if the Simpsons predict a Donald Trump presidency, they do. If the Simpsons do a whole show about Ground Zero and 9/11, where they hold up a magazine that says 9/11 on it, I think that's pretty obvious that there's some predictive programming going on there. And that
what do you mean by predictive programming? Because it sounds like you're saying that they're advocating it. Or
that's not what predictive programming means. That's not what it doesn't mean. It advocates. It doesn't mean they want it to happen. It means that there's somebody's probably trying to warn you. This is what may be going on. You know, I wrote an article 1 week prior to 9/11. I think it was 1 week. 1 week prior to 9/11 called the Abaddon Nexus. And I wrote it and I said something in effect that I feel like my friends are being persecuted against. There's a lot of tension in the world. And I said, and I've been having these horrible dreams about the end of America and blah, 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 blah. And I wrote it because I seriously was going through a hard time in my life. I just broke up with my girlfriend and things were kind of sucky. And I wrote it called the Abaddon Nexus. And the funny thing was I got a phone call from some guy who was in Indiana. I don't know how he got my home number. He says, I'm coming out to you. And I says, why is that? And he says, because I read your article, Abaddon Nexus. And I said, yeah. And he says, and I want to come out and find out what you were thinking when you wrote it. And I says, I don't understand. And he says, if you look up Revelation chapter 9, verse 11, it speaks of Abaddon in the Bible. And I said, oh, really? I didn't know that. I just wrote it because I called it the Abaddon Nexus. So it was completely accidental. But see, he told me, he says, that's a bit of predictive programming and maybe a little, psychic intuition on your part. And I said, well, maybe. I said, but I can tell you I knew nothing about 9/11 happening and he says, and plus you named your show Ground Zero. How did that happen? And I said, well, I named it Ground Zero back in 1995. So he was of the opinion that I knew something because my show's called Ground Zero and I wrote an article called Abaddon Nexus on 9/11. Now that doesn't mean I advocate what happened in New York. That doesn't mean that, I was hoping for it to happen, but it means that somewhere in there, the writers of The Simpsons, somewhere in there, the writers of films, they end up writing these things. Now, there are people who intentionally do this because they know something is going on. So
that's the difference.
But it's still predictive programming. It's predictive programming and approximation programming.
And predictive programming are two different things.
Well, no, it's approximation programming. They're not heroes at all. They're propaganda heroes. They're put together so that we remember the good fight in Syria that started by the original Syrian fighter, and that's Barack Obama. They still have their head so far up the Obama's backside. They give a nice little trophy to an old fossil of theirs, and it's still a mess. It's been left behind. Who knows what Trump's going to do with it? But in the meantime, we give it an Academy Award because, they were something that were created by the Soros people, and it's just create some fake heroes just to make people feel good about killing people and everything else and working with Al-Qaeda and ISIS. 888-673-3700. That's 888-673-3700. Let's go to Renee in Arizona. Hi, Renee. You're on Ground Zero.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi. I only got to hear what you were saying. I couldn't hear what your guests were saying. So if I am repeating anything, just let me know.
It's a whole new hour.
Yeah. The movie that I wanted to talk about was 13 Hours, The Secret Soldiers of Benghazi.
Oh, yeah, 13 Hours. What did you think of that film?
My head is still spinning because the way they did it, they put news bites in that were dug up later from real life, like that being about Muhammad jokes. This is their red line, and Hillary saying, well, I also listened to the interviews of the three men who participated, who were the soldiers that hired security guards, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got to hear their side of it, and then I got to hear Hillary say, what does it matter now? Actually, Hillary.
Mm-hmm.
And I listened to the interviews and statements and all that, and I still, the brutality of it, and then you hear the ugly news that you get from outside sources.
Right.
Like what really happened to Chris Stevens that was seen from the drone, and then the explanation of his death in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
Smoke inhalation, and he's in a bathroom in a movie, and the smoke is pouring through. There's a bathrobe hanging up there. It's like, dude, put the bathrobe in the sink, get it wet, and cover the hole under the door. And then they had this, one of his guards, his bodyguard, Chris Stevens' bodyguard, just acting so stupid throughout the whole film.
Well, here's the deal. Here's the deal about 13 Hours. I mean, you're criticizing it for how bad you hated it. And critics hated it. Critics hated it.
I'm watching it, trying to figure out what the heck was going on.
Well, yeah, critics hated it very much. Critics gave it a big thumbs down, very much. But the thing that I think is funny about it is they sit and they say how bad 13 Hours was, that it was a propaganda film that of course Michael Bay had put together. But of course they say it's a propaganda film, but yet they won't say that this film White Helmets is a propaganda film. I think that's really funny.
Why?
What's that?
Why would they say one is and won't say if the other is?
Because one fits the agenda of one particular political party. That's why.
Mm-hmm.
Because Michael Bay, I'm sure, took a conservative view against Hillary Clinton on this issue. And they didn't like that. And that's why. Because it was basically vilifying. It was out there to vilify Hillary Clinton. And so those who were mostly liberal critics hated it. And I didn't see the film because I try to avoid films about that because I just know that they're trying to push any kind of propaganda stand. I mean, I'll walk away pissed off because I feel like I've been basically, hit with a cudgel, their political ideology. So I knew that it would be a political ideology that would lean more right than left, but I knew that the left would have a heyday of it saying it's a horrible film and that it's all coded and they would spin a conspiracy on it even if there wasn't one to be had. But of course, another political folly, but they pick and choose what movies are most loved in Hollywood. And I know that people like Clooney, for example, he basically loves the White Helmets. And so George Clooney has been very vocal about them. And I think it's because, the darling of Hollywood is the White Helmets because Hollywood invented them. They have a camera crew following them everywhere. That's the whole point. So when you got something that's structuring a sympathy for a group of people that are, in with Al-Qaeda and in with ISIS and several other groups, forget that. Look at what they're doing. Look what the bad guys are doing. They're doing good deeds. Okay, if you say so, Let's go to Don in Oregon. Hi, Don. You're on Ground Zero.
Hi, Clyde.
Hey.
I think it was on the afternoon news on KXL today. I heard that the people, the accountants that gave the envelopes, that mix up, somehow they got their addresses and they've hired bodyguards because these people are getting death threats. Mm-hmm. And it just lends credence to the old phrase, they eat their own, don't they?
Well, and it could be all Hollywood propaganda, too. I mean,
like I said, it was on the news, but,
right. Well, because I know for a fact, and this is the thing, is I know because, I've been involved with at least 3 films, but they've all been independent. Right. They've never gone anywhere, close to being Academy Award nominated films. I mean, one was one that I helped write, and the other one was a sort of what I call what you watch in college, kind of a college type frat boy film. It's called Toxic Avenger 4. But the thing is, when you're dealing with Hollywood, it's not by how good a film is. A film could suck. And I'm sure most of the films, and I don't know if anybody, I saw Arrival. It wasn't the best film in the world, but it was up for an Academy Award. It was just, I thought the approach was a lot more fresh than I expected, and that's why I liked the film. On merits alone, it was kind of a dry film. And it had the same, I guess, it had the same texture to it as would a library book. It's like if somebody gave you a book and turned it into a movie, that's how it was. It was like reading a book. Books satisfy you, but there are no bombs going off and there are no special effects except for what you can imagine in your mind. It's kind of like that's how dry it was, but it was still an intriguing topic. But you're seeing all these other films. What's that?
My stepdaughter lent it to me, so I'll go ahead and watch it. I've heard it's excellent, but you take everything with a grain of salt.
Well, it is excellent. Like I said, it's excellent in standpoint of the approach. The approach is very fresh and very new, but I would say that was up for an Academy Award because of how it was fresh and new and everything else. But it did not push agendas that they wanted to have show at a Hollywood film, and so that's why a movie like Moonlight wins over La La Land. So I'm just sitting here saying to myself, it's all basically campaigning. It's all about the money. It's all about how many parties you go to. It's all about how many ads you take out in the Hollywood Reporter and Rolling Stone and the Village Voice. It's all you need to do is say, for your consideration, this is the movie. And you wouldn't believe some films, they send free films to people. They send gifts to the people in the Academy. They send them gifts. They send them wine. They send them letters and videos and say, please consider this. Here's a T-shirt for your kids. They do everything to butter up the Academy to vote for them.
Sure. Last thing, Clyde, tell Emerson I said hi. I miss him.
Well, I miss him too. I haven't seen him in years, so I hope.
Oh, okay. Well, I just thought I used to listen to you two on the radio. So.
Oh, yeah. Those were good times back then. Those were good times.
Absolutely.
All right, Don.
Thank you, Clyde.
Thank you for the call. We're going to take a break. 888-673-3700. That's 888-673-3700. And tonight, it's the Academy Awards, 3 nights, but I wanted to give my comments on what's going on with this whole mess with, the wrong or the right or whatever, but the whole idea of Hollywood giving an Academy Award to a film about pretty much a Hollywood type of hero that has turned into a reality. I know a lot of people are saying, this is bad to be smearing the white helmets. I'm not really smearing them. I'm just saying, come on. You obviously, these guys, come from somewhere, but they certainly aren't coming from Syria. 888-673-3700. We'll be back.
FM News 101 KXL.
PatriotPrepared.com carries the leading brands of storable food from Numana, Legacy, and Heaven's Harvest. Patriot Prepared. Our name says it all. We're dedicated to empowering you to be self-reliant and confident in any circumstance. Whether you want to be prepared in the event of an emergency or you're an outdoor sports enthusiast, PatriotPrepared.com has prepackaged meals and kits for your entire family. Legacy, Heaven's Harvest, and Numana are known for high-quality, great-tasting GMO-free, nutritious food with no chemical preservatives. Simple to prepare, easy to store, gluten-free and organic high-quality nutrition options with a 25-year shelf life. You can't beat the feeling of being food secure when you need it most. So go to PatriotPrepared.com right now to pick up your supply of high-quality storable food for your family, because it makes good sense to be prepared. That's PatriotPrepared.com.
This is Ground Zero with Clyde Lewis on FM News 101.
Let's go to Carl in Nevada. Hi, Carl. You're on Ground Zero.
Yeah. Hi, Clyde. Listen, I want to ask you something about the white helmet short you were talking about, short subject. I have a doctorate in clinical psychology, so I'm not that kind of a nut. So I want to let you know.
No, I don't think you're not.
I also know something about the film business. My father was the vice president of 20th Century Fox years ago, and I know people in the business. And I'll admit with you that some of the things were shot and staged. But I've talked to somebody who knew about the film from Hollywood, and they said they did save lives. They did save some lives.
No doubt.
Lives.
No doubt.
And I want to know, how you criticizing it, how many lives lately have you saved?
Well, first of all, it's not my job to save lives. And second of all, it's not my job to fake heroes. And Hollywood does that all the time. So don't ask me how many lives I save, because that's not a valid question. First of all, that's not a very logical question to ask, because I'm a talk show host. And I'm not a hero in that regard. But I'll tell you this much. I'm not a person who's going to sit there and take credit for all kinds of lives saved when there are a group of individuals called the Civil Defense Group of Syria who also go in and save lives, who don't go into those areas where al-Nusra and ISIS and al-Qaeda hang out. For some reason, they're able to do that, and they have a film crew behind them every time they go and do that. How interesting is that?